Hey, you guys, welcome to the fifth Wisdom Wednesday. So glad y'all are joining us again. We've had some awesome responses from some of you. If you want to, IM us or whatever, we would love to hear from you and hear how this Bible study is really starting to impact you. And we definitely are hearing from some girls, so it's awesome. And I hope you'll share, even online and on your Instagram page, that you might want to share some things that God's doing in your life, and just tag us with hashtag I am more in him. We'd love to hear from you. Anyway, today, let's get started. We are going to be talking about the story of Jacob, and I'm going to share my story with you this week. So we've heard from Lindsay. She did an awesome job last week. She shared how her story related to waiting for God, and just like Abraham had to do. And so this week we're going to talk about Jacob, and I think a lot of you guys are probably going to really relate to his story. But let's give a real quick review of who we've talked about already and kind of connect some dots for you. So last week we talked about Abraham. Remember, he married Sarah, and that was where the beginning of God's promise started, that he would have them as his people, and he was going to give them a promised land to live in. So we have Abraham and Sarah, and then they have Isaac. Isaac is their son, and he marries Rachel. Rachel has and Isaac have twins. They have Esau and Jacob. Jacob is the younger of the two sons, which is interesting because Jacob actually lives up to his name. His name means sneaky and tricky and cheater. And what he does is he actually lives up to that by stealing and cheating and tricking his brother Esau to give up his blessing and his birthright to him. And that meant the older son typically, in their tradition, got all of the father's inheritance. And so Esau ends up being tricked into giving his whole entire inheritance to his younger brother Jacob. Well, you can imagine when he figures out what Jacob's done, he is mad. Like, he is ticked. And he is so mad, he's ready to kill Jacob. So Jacob has to run, and he is gone for many, many years. And he is distanced from his family, goes and lives with some relatives far away so that his brother Esau cannot kill him. So he stays gone. He's gone for years. And in our story this week, we see where there is this point where Jacob is about to meet Esau again. He's about to see him for the first time in years, and he doesn't know how Esau is going to respond. Is he going to kill him? Is he going to be furious with him? Is he going to kill his whole family? What is he going to do? How is he going to react? He's at a crisis point in his life. And so he has been relying all these years on his own ability to be tricky and ability to figure things out, and his own ability really to control situations and people. And he's done a pretty good job of it up until this point. But now God has brought him to a point where he really can't control this situation. And if you think about it, God usually brings all of us at some point to a place like that where we are in a situation or a circumstance, or there's someone or something that we have no control over. And that is usually a crossroads in our life. That is where what I call a watershed moment can happen. And if you know, you may know that I Am More in Him is part of, it's under the ministry of Watershed Ministries. And the reason we named it that was because I believe that every one of us has those watershed moments in our life where God gives us an opportunity to either keep going the way we've been going or go a new way. And so that's the point that Jacob has gotten to this week. And so he is at a point where he has to decide, and we all get to this point, am I going to keep trusting in myself and my own abilities and my way of doing things, or am I going to surrender and trust to God? So let's look at how Jacob first responds to this. Look at verse 22 and 23. It says, during the night, Jacob got up and took two of his wives, his two servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. And after taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. So he's still in that mode up until this very point of trying to, figure out how he can organize and rely on his own ability and his own way of protecting himself and his family. And even if he could just buy his way out of it and send all his possessions to his brother, maybe he wouldn't be so mad at him. He's still trying to control everything. But then something happens. He has a night of wrestling with God. He prays, and God meets him where he is. And he says, that he's in this difficult situation. And so we see in verse 24 that Jacob is all alone. And so how many of us get into these situations and prayer is a last resort rather than a first resort? But that is an indication that we're really trusting in ourselves more than we're trusting in God. So if you have prayer as a last resort, you might want to take a look at that, because that is what that indicates oftentimes. So we want to be able to go to prayer first instead of as a last resort. But Jacob is doing that. He goes to prayer as a last resort. And then in verse 24, he is all alone with God. God gets Jacob all by himself so that he can get his full attention. One of the devil's main tactics is distraction, and we all have lots of distractions. Our phones and school and like all kinds of things, people and everything can be a distraction. God removes all of that, and he has Jacob. It's just Jacob and God. It's that moment where he is just alone with God. And he a lot of times brings us to a place where we're alone because he wants to do the same thing. He wants our full attention. And maybe he's got you in that place at this point. So if he is, I want you to pay attention, because in this story, it talks about the man wrestling with God. I want to make sure you understand this is not just a human man. This is God taking on human flesh. It is actually a special appearance of Jesus. It's one of the few special appearances of Jesus in the Old Testament. And so we see this already, how there's this glimpse of what's to come. So God wrestles with Jacob, and it's not Jacob wrestling with God. God initiates that wrestling match because God wants something from Jacob, and he wants something from us, and we're going to find out what that is. So just imagine the scene now. I mean, it was crazy. It lasted all night long. It was wilder than WWE, and I know y'all probably know that's a crazy thing. And so anyway, it lasts all night, and it shows really in that the length of that struggle just how determined Jacob was and how stubborn he was to hold on to his own way of doing things. And I don't know about you, but we can be a lot the same way. We can be determined to have things our way, and we want to control our lives, and we really can fight desperately to do that. But I want to share with you now my story, because I was in a position like this where I really had pretty good control over my own life. I'd been able to keep things kind of the way I wanted them most of the time. But a while back, my husband and I had a baby, and her name was Sarah. And we ended up, long story short, we found out just very unexpectedly that she had leukemia, infantile leukemia, and it was devastating. And so we ended up at Duke, and we were there for 4.5 months. But in that time, about a month into it, I can remember asking God, probably praying like 1,000,000 times, like, why, God? Why is this happening to my baby? Why is this happening to us? I thought I did everything right. Why was my prayer. And maybe you've prayed that prayer too. And I looked around. There was one night where I was in the ICU with her, and my husband and I would take turns. So it was just me in the room with her, and she was lying in the bed, and I was sitting in the rocking chair beside her. And I looked out, and I saw all these other kids out the window too that were just also really sick. And I just prayed the most desperate why prayer. It was just like the other ones I'd prayed, but it was really desperate. And in the silence of that room, I will tell you, that was probably one of the clearest times I've ever heard God speak to me. And he simply said this. He said, don't ask why, ask what. And I was like, okay, God, what? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And he very clearly answered me and said, just love her. And I thought, okay, I can do that. I can do that. And so over the days and months that passed, until the day that she died, I continued to just wake up every day, and instead of asking why, I just would ask God, what? God, what do you want me to do today? What do you want me to know about you? How do you want me to be more like Jesus? And every day God was faithful to answer that question. But the point that I want to make is this, is that God never answered my why question, but what he was doing in that was he changed the direction of my life. It was a watershed moment, a lot like Jacob had, because my why question, when I realized years later, was a question of control. If I could figure out why, then maybe I could change it. Maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could make it different. And the what question, instead, the one that God wanted me to ask, was a question of surrender. It didn't mean that I had to like what was happening, but when I asked God what, I was saying, God, I don't like this. I don't want this. But Lord, I'm trusting you to show me what you want me to do in this. What do you want to teach me in this? And I can tell you, God was so faithful to answer that question. So why is a question often of our own trying to control it, and what became a question of surrender. And I can tell you that the blessing comes in the surrender, because when we surrender our will to God's, there is a blessing that comes that it's the beginning of a new and closer relationship with him. And that is the best blessing you could ever have. Just like Jacob, I was changed. I didn't get a new name, but I was a new person. And we, like Jacob, can pray for our situation to change, deliverance from our enemies, but God might not do that. But the blessing comes when we're delivered from our own self-reliance and rescued from the real enemy, our stubborn, selfish, sinful nature, where we hold tighter to God than anyone else, because that is the beginning of really knowing God. So if you realize that you've been trying to control people and situations in your life, I want to encourage you to get alone with God like Jacob did, to pray an honest prayer, to wrestle it out with God, and through that prayer. And then I want to encourage you to surrender, because as you see how trustworthy he is and how you can trust the control that only he really has, honestly, then that can really be an impactful thing for you. And I would even suggest picturing, if you can hold your hands open as you're praying and just picture whatever it is that you've been holding tightly and trying to control, whether it's a boyfriend or a friend relationship or a circumstance or something in your home that you're struggling with or your school, then I would suggest that you just take whatever that is and imagine it and picture it, and just imagine yourself coming before God and just opening your hands to him and really just surrendering that situation or that person or whatever it is to him. And that really can be the beginning of freedom for you. So this week, I hope that you can walk in that freedom and that you remember whose you are and who you are, and that will change the direction and standard you set for your life. We love you, girls, and we'll see you next week.